Hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Here podcast. I'm excited today to be talking to Allison Damager. Allison, I have seen your name and heard people talking about you. I think this is my third book that I've was between Releasing the Motherload from Erica Jasa, Equal Partners from Kate Mangino. I forget if you were also referencing Fair Play, but maybe the other one was Emotional Labor by Rose Hackman. But your name just keeps coming up, and so I knew I needed to reach out to you. I think as a coach that I call myself an invisible labor coach, and or I changed my Instagram name recently to Zach Mental Load Coach. It feels inappropriate for me to call myself enough of an expert to be a coach, but not continue to educate myself by meeting people and talking with people that have significantly more credentialing around this. So you did was it your doctorate at Harvard?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so my understanding is that you are one of the top leading researchers in the world around this specific topic of cognitive labor, invisible labor. What am I missing from your introduction here?
That's super flattering, and it's always great to hear that the word is being spread in different ways in different books. So yeah, I am an assistant professor of sociology. Right now, I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I came here after I finished up my PhD at Harvard in 2022. I just finished a book about cognitive labor. It'll come out next year, but the production timeline, it takes a while. So yeah, that's I think the basics.
I'm looking forward today to talking with you because I think I can skip past some of the basics of I'm not going to be asking, well, what is mental load, which is the first question anyone asks me when I'm on a podcast. But I wanted to, and I know you wanted to ask me a couple questions as well. So probably around the halfway mark, we'll switch so that you can ask me things around what you wanted to put in your blog. But I want to start off with this excerpt from Releasing the Motherload by Erica Jasa. So she said, we break down any household task into 4 steps. For example, when a bottle feeding an infant. So typically, some step back context is I typically, when I'm teaching it in the modules that I offer to my mental load mastery community, I generally go with about 3 layers to keep it somewhat simple. So we start with physical domestic labor, which sometimes intersects with sort of care labor, whether it's picking up a child or physically doing things. Then there's the thinking, the more left brain side of things. So calculating, you wouldn't see it being done, but you can if you could probably hear someone, and there's that viral clip of mom math of I need to be here by this time, then that means I need to be here this time because this takes this long. So calculating. And then there's typically what I say is the third layer is emotional labor, which is the caring aspect, the concerning of other people's wants, needs, emotions, experience. But from what I have here, which you talk about is you break down, I think, cognitive labor and or the left brain aspect into deeper categories. So it's anticipating needs, identifying options, deciding on what option to go with, and then monitoring. And I think this one I know you've also talked about how sometimes it's couples typically come together. I think it was on not the identifying options, but deciding what option to go with. I thought it was really interesting. I had a potential client this morning that decided to register. And if them and their partner are on the call together, I'll say, hey, my programs aren't super cheap. I think they're appropriately priced. But I say, hey, I know sometimes a lot of people got to talk about this. I'm going to go off camera. Why don't you guys go off camera for a couple minutes and talk it over? And so they did that, and this probably happens in maybe half the calls that I have. And he comes back, and his wife has been in the background of the call for most of the time we've talked. And he pretty much came back and said, well, I could go do this myself. I could go find the podcast. I could find the books, the authors, the the videos to watch and I could do all that stuff. And I don't know if I'm going to do that stuff. And I know that like I had to like kind of remind him like, yeah, like you could binge watch my videos for 2 days straight and probably get the gist of my coaching. Or I've put it specifically in a week by week basis where there's 5 to 12 minute modules that are appropriately sequenced. And so I think it was like a really precise moment of like him acknowledging. I usually let them have that choice together, but it was like in that moment he was identifying the identifying of options, which is not historically something even I recognize that Alyssa and I do. Um, she will do a lot more of the identifying options, and I'm typically like the financial gatekeeper.
Interesting.
I know that one of the challenges that Alyssa and I, so we're also moving. I know you said that you're moving. When it comes to financial choices and the cognitive labor around that, I tend to think that a lot of men are the slightly more financial, maybe not financially savvy, but maybe more frugal. What have you seen so far? I'm imagining you've seen a good amount of this. Is like when it comes to finances, where does the division of labor typically land?
Yeah, that's a great question. Finances is one of, I think, the most interesting domains that I look at because it's pretty unusual and pretty varied. So I break down in my research, I think, 9 different domains, categories of life where people are doing this mental or cognitive work. And the two most male typed in my research are financial management and maintenance, home, car, etc. Now, that's not to say that men in most couples do the majority of that work, but like it's around about half of the couples are led by men in those domains. And so with finances in particular, I saw in a lot of couples an interesting breakdown where you look at sort of short term, kind of at the level of the budget, right? How much are we spending on groceries in a week? Oh, have we paid the babysitter? Those, I mean, it varies, but those tend to be a little bit more women in the couples that I've spoken to with big picture financial things. So, are we on track for retirement? Can we afford this particular house? Those are definitely more male typed in the
Hmm.
couples where men are often the ones with that longer range financial view. And in terms of like why that is or where that comes from, I think
Wait, can I want to guess a correlation, which I'm wondering if my guess is accurate. So I know, especially because there's so many stay-at-home moms, although I know it's a much smaller percentage than it used to be. I imagine a lot more guys, especially because they're a higher percentage of the breadwinners, percentage-wise and in total, that they're probably earning more put into their 401ks, into their IRAs, and so they're almost forced because they typically own more of those assets, and then their spouse is a beneficiary but not like the owner. Do you think that that's a correlation of why that is?
I think that's one pathway. So, an interesting counterexample is my own parents. So, my mom was a stay at home mom until I was about 13. My dad was the sole breadwinner, but he would bring home his paper check and give it to my mom, and she would cash it, and then she'd do all the accounting, all the whatever. And they talked about it, they made decisions together, but he was not super involved. Um, in terms of numbers, I'm not sure. I have definitely seen a lot of cases like what you're talking, where he's earning more, he's got the 401k, the whatever through his job, so he's managing it. I think the other piece is there's sort of like a gender socialization angle where I think that women are not necessarily taught to manage money. They're not necessarily taught to sort of think of themselves as managing money, planning for
Mm.
retirement. And I think because men are historically associated with providing for the family, they have that idea probably in the back of their mind. They're maybe a little more attuned to, oh, I read this thing. This could be relevant for me. Let me click on this article about 10 things to not to do in your 401k
Mm.
or whatever. So it might be a little bit like their radar is attuned to different things based on the messages they've gotten around your role in a family.
Now I'm curious. Now when I say this to people, I'm typically pointing out that this is a little bit of a guess. It's like me piecing together things. Hopefully, you can either back me up or debunk the hell out of it. There, I'm sure you've seen one or two of these videos out there where it's Thanksgiving, people are coming over, and a wife takes a video of the husband outside, like leaf blowing the roof or like clipping like a single branch in the backyard and taking way too long about it. And they're like, what the hell is he doing? Now, and I think another one was he was like dusting off the TV in his work area, which no one was probably going to see. But what I think is that I'm going to say this for clickbait is I think people are selfish. And I think that a lot of our culture has told us men that like your workspace, like where, if you have a garage with your work tools, like that's what you're going to get judged on. And the exterior of your home, that's what you're going to get judged on. And the money you bring home and the amount of it and maybe the things that it buys, that's what you're going to get judged for. And ladies, you're going to get judged for whether there's dust on your cabinets. You're going to get judged for if the windows are clean and or if there's scratches on your floor or dirt. And so I think that when we see guys doing this, I don't love the word weaponized incompetence, not because I don't think it's real, because I think it turns into an umbrella statement that talks about a lot more. That I think weaponized incompetence is specifically about when a guy is like purposefully, manipulatively doing something incorrectly. I liken it to, a third degree murder, or is it first degree murder? Whatever, like the super
Bad
like,
one, first degree.
the worst one, yeah. Versus like forgetting to take out the trash and like maybe screwing it up, forgetting about it. I think that's more like negligence. Like you're not thinking about it, but you're not purposefully forgetting about it or pretending to forget about it. Damn it, where was I going with this? So I think a lot of these videos, like we're seeing what looks like these guys doing things that feel really random, but to me they feel obvious because it's like a judgment of society that we feel is bearing down on us, and that's why we prioritize those things. Would you agree?
I really agree with that. I probably wouldn't use the word selfish. I might use
Yeah.
slightly different language, but your point that men and women are held accountable for different things, I think is really spot on, right? In my research, right, I mostly have interviewed couples who, I don't know if they'd use the word feminist, but they would say things like, "Well, yeah, we're equal. We want to be, equal partners in this relationship," and yet have a lot of inequality when it comes to mental work. So I agree that the sort of deliberate shirking of responsibility is the exception rather than the rule in a lot of the couples that I've interacted with. And I think that the incentives, right, are really aligned so that the lawn, right? The lawn is sort of a classic case. I had several men that I interviewed sort of say, like, my neighbors are going to judge me if I let the lawn grow too long, right? And I talked to their wives, a couple hours later, and they say, "Oh, he's obsessed with the lawn. I don't understand it. I don't care about the lawn," right? And those same women might be obsessed with the clothing their children were wearing, right? Because that's the sort of thing that, people at the schoolyard will make comments about, did you see what, those Jones kids were wearing? And they don't even have two socks of the same color, right? And so you kind of anticipate, if I don't do this, there might be blowback, right? People might judge me as not being a good dad, a good husband, or a good wife, a good mother, etc. And then you prioritize accordingly.
An interesting thing that someone told me the other day. So typically I try to make my content geared for helping men better understand this, but a lot of, naturally, 91% of my audience is women because they feel very validated in their experience. But what still catches me off guard a lot of times is that women are saying that they learn a lot from me. I'm like, what do I have to teach you that you don't already know? And I think what has been interesting is that I just put words to what they're experiencing. And without the words, then there's a lot of invalidation, gaslighting, and like, why am I so stressed out? Why don't I want to have sex with my husband? and they just don't really know where to go with that. Um, so what I work on is really just labeling. If you were to boil my job of, can't believe I get to call this my job still, but if you were to boil down my job as a content creator and a coach, I feel like that is 70+% of my job is helping people label and change the language that they use to describe things. Have you noticed in the couples that you work with that the people that are maybe a little more, I'm going to say, invisible labor literate, like they're using that kind of terminology, that things feel a little more equal, or like they're able to articulate where inequalities they are that they experience?
It's interesting you say that. So well, I guess not that recently, about a year and a half ago, I did a round of interviews with queer couples. So mostly same gender couples. And they, as a group, there was variation, of course, within that group, but as a whole, I would describe them as a lot more invisible labor literate than many of the different gender couples that I had interviewed previously. Now, part of that might be timing, right? I feel like folks like you and many others coming on the scene, there's just broader awareness of these topics than there was back in 2017 when I first started doing this research. So, a little bit of confounding perhaps. But I would, ask them about, explain, here's the difference between physical labor and mental labor. Who in your partnership, do you think carries more of the load in each of these areas? And a lot of times they'd say something like, "Oh, we've talked about this all the time, right? We had this conversation just this morning. I think my spouse carries more of this invisible load. I do a little bit more of the physical." And so I think having that language gave them ways to sort of make it an explicit decision that it wasn't always perfectly 50-50. In fact, in many of the queer couples that I interviewed, it was unequal. But they seemed to feel differently about it because it felt like something that they had chosen together, right? And could continually reevaluate and say, is this still working? Or is one partner feeling overburdened? Okay, then how do we adjust? Whereas with a lot of the different gender couples, it was as if they were hearing these terms for the first time in the interview. And I could see for many of them, it was like, yeah, I do all this stuff, right? And kind of speaking to your piece about having the language to be like, oh, here's why I'm exhausted. It was really exciting for them. And I heard from some couples after I did the interviews that, that was basically like a therapy session, right? You sparked so many good conversations that we've never had before. So I think there's something really powerful about being on the same page and having the same vocabulary that you can use to discuss not just with your friends and sort of complain about your partner, but with your partner to
Mm.
actually have this conversation about what are we doing and is it what we want?
And I think that's one of my favorite DMs to receive is when, you know, couples either side say like, thank you for these videos. Like this has improved the way that we talk about these things. And, I think every once in a while I come across a troll that's like, or you'll see like a GIF or something. I remember my friend Paige, she also talks a lot about these things, and she gets like the angry men comments say, just fighting her on it. And, or I remember asking her one time, like, do people really still like not believe you? Like I've gone through comments, but even I know Instagram sorts them so that you see what you're going to agree with first. And she's like, yeah, I got tagged in this one today. And it was, someone said, it was like a meme with Matthew McConaughey from Wolf of Wall Street saying that mental load, it's a fugazi, it's a fugazi, it's a fairy dust. Um, and I'm curious if you, I was a math teacher for years, and I feel like there's a handful, when you drop numbers on people that are like irrefutable, there's just, you can't fight back against it unless they're trying to illegitimize the where you got the numbers. Do you have one or more favorite statistics that you like to drop on people? And I would say the main one that I feel like I'm going to get it wrong because I thought I heard a different number the other day, is that at least in America, that women's invisible labor and or like care labor makes up about $1.5 trillion within the economy if it were, if it were paid for, and they were pretty much, if they were hiring nannies and childcare to do their job, that's how much it would cost. Are there other numbers that like really hit home for you?
That's a good question. I feel like I might have to do the annoying academic answer on this
Damn
one
it.
and sort of so my work is qualitative,
Mm,
which means that I'm going out and spending hours with people, talking with them, and sort of understanding. And so I have numbers in some of my papers, but I always include caveats that this is not a representative sample. We need to replicate this on a broader sample.
mhm.
Um, so I actually usually try to avoid numbers when I'm talking about my research,
It's fair.
but there's lots of good stuff coming out of people who aspire to be
You're a researcher with integrity that is unwilling to cater to a content creator trying to create a little bit of clickbait. I get it.
yeah, I gotta stand by my but no, there's a growing movement that I'm really excited about of people who are doing quantitative research on these skills. So Eve Rodsky, who I know you've had on your podcast before, she's part of a team that I think led by Darby Saxby, if I'm getting her name right.
I
Anyway,
keep hearing her name too. I gotta get in
gotta
touch
get
with
her
her
on
now
next.
too.
Yeah. So they published a paper looking at sort of how much of the cognitive labor men and women are doing in their households and what sort of effect it's having on their mental health. So there's, I think, going to be more numbers coming soon as people figure out how to create really good metrics around this stuff. So talk to
Hmm.
me in 6 months or a year. I might have favorite stats for you.
I think when I talked with Eve, I hope I don't butcher the words backwards, but I know that one of the things that she talked about is the first goal is to have fair play. So it's improving equality in the home. And then when we have a little bit more equality in the home, then we can look at having a fair day, which is having more equality within the workplace. And when you have a little bit more equality in the workplace, then you can have fair say, which means you have more decision making power in the workplace, which then eventually turns into fair pay, which is just a brilliant
I
set of
love it.
words there.
Yeah.
Um, when you've looked at how employees and or like employers um, help their staff, help their people. I'm a big fan of the Pareto principle, 80-20, like identify the 20% item that creates 80% of the results. Another way to look at it is sort of like a big domino. If you can knock out this one domino, what else falls? Within the workplace, are there policies or are there things that you are seeing seem to have a bit of a initial domino effect around how that improves the either the cognitive labor or the equality that can exist in the home for the employees?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because I see the home sphere, the unpaid work sphere and the paid work sphere as really closely intertwined.
Hmm.
And I've gotten pushback on that in the past where people have said things like, well, employers can't decide for their employees how to divide work at home, right? Like that's the couple's decision. And
Hmm.
yes, on an immediate level, of course, it's the couple's decision. But the conditions that workplaces create for their employees shape the options that couples have. Um, so I think a couple big dominoes. One is addressing cultures of overwork. There are a lot of companies in the US and globally where you're really expected to be on call, right? It's not a 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. It's however many hours, you got to work weekends, you got to work nights,
Yeah.
you drop everything. And if you have caregiving responsibilities, right, that sort of means that the other partner has to be able to drop everything and do the caring, right? If a child needs to be picked up from school, et cetera, they need to be sort of tracking and managing so that one partner can be on call at work. So I think addressing those cultures and these expectations of being always on, always available, um, having unpredictable and inflexible schedules, I think that is really a big source of a lot of this in couples who reasonably they end up saying, well, okay, you're, a consultant, you're a lawyer, you are not going to be able to, drop everything and pick up a sick kid. So the other person in the relationship is going to have to do it.
Hmm.
And we look at things like the gender pay gap, right? Occupational segregation of men and women whose salary is often bigger, it's usually the man's, right? And so the woman ends up doing more of that caring labor. So if we can put limits on the ways that paid work can encroach on people's lives, I think that would really help.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of one of the guys that I worked with starting back in June. He recognized that, so he worked like a couple hours different from like the main like group that he worked with. He's in New Zealand. I think a bunch of his people were either in Australia or California or something. So oftentimes they would have these decision making meetings when he was not on his work hours. So sometimes he would, be in the middle of dinner and he would run over to his office, check out something, give the okay so that they could, have a more productive workday, not waiting for him another 24 hours later or something, probably 12 hours later. And he recently just recognized like, this is a huge issue in our marriage and my marriage is worth more than this. And he decided to leave his job. And they do have like a side hustle that they're working on. They're going to try scaling that up, but he recognized that like the lack of flexibility in his workplace was having enough of an issue in his marriage that it wasn't actually worth continuing in the way that it had been going on for years. And my next question for you is, and feel free to transition over into if you want to ask me questions. If we were to have this same conversation a couple of years from now, like right now we're asking how can employers improve the way that there's equal say, equal day. What is one of the questions you would love to be answering like a couple of years from now if we were to move the meter forward? I'm imagining, in terms of like women's reproductive rights, it's like, instead of like how do we pass laws so that they can have access to like healthcare and abortion, like I'm trying to think of like, now that we've gone backwards 2 years, like I don't even know what conversation we were having in 2022 around
Right. Yeah, it's
reproductive freedoms.
mind-blowing.
So I'm curious, if we were to move the meter forward as a collective society, what would be the question you would love to be working on answering in a couple of years?
Yeah, I love this. So where I hope we land in a couple years, maybe not land, but where we hope we are in a couple years, is thinking about how the sort of systems, right, government level, organization level, school level, create more mental work for families in the first place. Right. A lot of the conversation, rightfully so, is about how do we redistribute it more equally within households. But I think there's a lot of room for social actors at various levels to say, well, why do we have employment schedules that are totally out of sync with school schedules,
Mm.
right? Leaving people to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy coordinating aftercare and before care and summer care and snow day care, right? Can we sync those things up? Why is it so hard to do things like file your taxes, right? Other countries make it a lot easier, right? The IRS already has the information. Why do they make it so that we have to fill it out? So that's, two examples from, I think, a very long list of ways that we could be making the overall workload smaller for families, right? And so I think those are the two prongs of like, yes, we want to redistribute it within households so that one member, one gender is not overburdened. But I think we could also reduce the workload for everyone,
Mm.
and make having kids, raising a family, being part of a household a lot less laborious.
Yeah, and it's interesting is oftentimes when I'm talking to typically a man, like, and I recognize I need to build some trust with him, and he doesn't fully understand why it's important to have minimum standard of care in your home or like to work on, implementing the fair play method. I like to cite, I saw a video not long ago where this lady had to, I usually point out our homes are not the same that they were 50, 60 years ago, where they're literally, apparently the word parenting only started to exist in like the 60s or 70s. Before it was just like, make sure your kid doesn't die for the
Right.
most part, but like you don't have to parent them. But like the simplicity of what it was to be a parent back then, and or just to a working adult. Back then was different. But now when you want, getting them to, I think the example was sending them to swim lessons, you would
Mhm.
find a local watering hole and go there and like swim, and hopefully there's a lifeguard and swim with them.
Right.
But today, if you have multiple kids, you can't just do that. You have to sign up for swim lessons, and you can't just sign up for swim lessons. It's registration opens at midnight. And because there's 15 to 50 other families that are also registering, you got to sit there. You got to be there at midnight and be ready to click your face off, and have your credit card ready to go and already saved in Chrome, so that you don't have to type it in manually, or else you're
Totally.
going to miss your spot. And then 3 months later pass, and then you have to do the same thing if you miss your spot. Like, that's the world parents live in today, and you need structure to deal with those things. And we currently build structure in a capitalist society. Not I'm not using that word to be like negative, that we're just in a capitalist country. That they will put in appropriate structures if it means making money, but will we put in significant structures to keep our marriage afloat, to keep our family together, to keep ourselves happy? And that's usually my, it's not much of an elevator pitch, but it's a sort of the way that I go about explaining to people why I think structure is really important to build in your home, because that's the world we actually live in versus the romantic idea of parenting that we thought we were getting into.
Totally. Yeah, the way I kind of talk about it in my lectures for undergraduates is that parenting has intensified. It's more
Mm.
expensive, it's more time intensive, there's more pressures around, will my kid, make it to the middle class? Will they make it into this, college, this preschool even? And so I think there are a lot of, speaking of metrics, a lot of metrics to suggest that it's harder to be a parent now than it used to be.
Mm.
Is it okay if I switch and ask you a couple
Sure.
questions? So some of this stuff is going to be very basic for your audience, but for my audience, who I think is probably less familiar with you, basics are good. So can you pinpoint for me, like when and in what context you first learned about invisible labor, mental load? These like, when did those concepts cross your radar?
So I'm going to prequel the answer first. Is in 2020, before we were expecting, apparently Alyssa sent me some kind of article talking about invisible labor or domestic labor. And she recalls being really scared to share it with me because she thought I was going to completely invalidate it, be defensive, not receive it. Sadly, we looked back in our iPhone archives and could not find what article it was or whether it was shared via text. I'm wondering if it might have been Gemma Hartley's article that led to her Fed Up book. But um, that was 2020. And I think what eventually led me down I had the opportunity of 4 months of paternity leave. It was 3 months, and then I ended up having a fourth by getting appendicitis on the very last day, which I believe
Lovely.
that I honestly believe I manifested it an extra month, because it was only like a week of recovery, but I got a whole month
Okay.
off. In that time, I got to see and be there firsthand for all of the problems. I was a teacher at the time. Um, I was also already creating content on TikTok, mostly personal development, and I started talking about fatherhood. And I don't think, to answer your question, it took another year till 2022 in the summer. Laura Danger was someone I was listening to a lot. Abby Eckel, Kaylee Cresta. I don't recall them starting to use some of that language until they recommended that I read the book Fair Play. And I
Mm,
got the same recommendation in like the same week. And I was like, well, now I know what my next book is. So I started listening to the book, and Fair Play was definitely like the first place that I think I could articulate it. I was probably slowly, from listening to all these, I'm going to call them momfluencers. I think I was probably slowly seeping into my subconscious, but I don't think I could have articulated it all that well until Fair
yeah.
Play.
Yeah. Fair play is often the gateway for people.
Yeah, it's a good gateway drug.
A good kind of gateway drug. Okay, so you know, 2020 is sort of this issue first crossed your radar. You were sort of gradually steeped in it over the next couple of years, and now you are invisible labor, mental labor coach, right? What was that pivot point from consumer to teacher?
So I was a teacher for 8 years. So I think there's a lot of teacher in me. Whenever, as I'm growing, I like to, for a while, I made YouTube videos to try to teach life lessons to my math students because my fellow teachers would talk shit to me saying that I wasn't teaching enough math and I needed to stop talking about goals with my students. So I think I've always really liked using social media as a platform for teaching. So as I was becoming a dad, shared I had a couple of videos to perform really, really well, talking about the breastfeeding experience and trying to support my wife in her wanting to stay like true to that. The experience of getting a sleep coach and having a terrible sleeping baby
Mm,
who's not 3 years old. So I think I had a lot of people. I jumped like 2,000 to 50,000 followers in a month when our kid came in and I was sharing about fatherhood. As I started reading Fair Play, uh, I started a huge thing that I've learned from Gary Vaynerchuk about content creation is document the journey. So what I started doing was, I remember my first couple videos about the book is as I would read a chapter, I would speak it out loud and like share my raw moment in the moment reactions. And then, after over a month or so, I started sharing here's what we're trying to do for me to own the minimum standard of care of dishes. And then in December 2022, I made a video saying, I think I just added mental load for my wife. I, what was the thing I had said? It was like, there were two options for pajamas. And I had said like, which one do you want? And I realized I could have just chosen one and said, do you have a preference otherwise? And that video did pretty well. 100,000 was pretty good at the time. Still is pretty good. And then I was like, okay, well, I got a lot of good feedback on that one. So I made another one like the next day and I said, I think I did it again, part infinity. And I said, I asked Alyssa, should we give her water or milk? She was sick and she was, going down for nap time. And I said, come on, Zach, like we could have just chosen and said, I think we should do milk because of X. That video is at 6.4 million views on TikTok.
wow.
And that was the moment that I was like, do people not know this? Like I was like, oh, well, the content and egotistical person side of me was like, well, now we have to make at least 20 of these. So I kept doing that and they kept doing really well. And I just kept making them. And at some points, people started saying, Zach, can you make some educational, like, can you put together a course? And so I hired a coach and he said, Zach, your audience is 91% women. Like, what do you want to coach them on? I was like, I don't think I want to coach women. I have nothing to teach them. Sure, they might be finding value, but I think I want, I want to be my own client. Like, I think Zach a couple of years ago would have really benefited from the coach that I want to be today. So I got my first couple one-on-one clients and my coach told me, he's like, you start a group program when you can narrow down their problems before they hop on the call.
Mm,
So those first like first four clients, I started to get a feel for what their problems were, what generically they were kind of coming to me about. And I think after 2 or 3 months, I could probably tell you everything that a guy was going to tell me when they jumped onto a call. So today, I think it was in December. I had a couple of videos do really well. Kristen Bell commented on one of my videos. It was really cool. I got to do a collaboration with her in January, and there was just a couple of videos did really well with call to actions to book a call. I had enough clients that I decided to go full time in January, and I've been doing that since. So I I think it started with educational materials. I got a fair play facilitation. I think I just saw people believing in me more than I believed in myself, that I was apparently decent at talking about this. And I think my teacher background of teaching, but also the teacher background of the emotional labor of teaching,
Yeah.
um, I think low key helped me become pretty good at talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it strikes me that, your vulnerability is key, right? You were not waiting to share until after you figured it all out and here, but it was like, okay, here, I'm learning this, I'm messing up in real time, I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about it, I'm trying again, right? And then that transitioned. Um, so you mentioned that 90, I think it's 91% of your viewers are women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what why do you think that is, right? Like, why do you think? Because I would have naively predicted, okay, he's Zach's a guy, he's talking about men and invisible labor, right? Most of his audience will be men. That's not the case. So why do you think we see such an extreme gender breakdown the other way?
I'm gonna ask a semi-rhetorical question that I think will answer it better than if I were to answer it straight. If you had a woman explaining to other women why they should be having more sex with their husband, what kind of following do you think they would have?
Mm, yeah,
Would
probably a lot of.
probably a lot of guys saying
Yep.
like, "Hey, listen to this lady. You should be having more sex with me."
Yep.
So similarly, I think it's I look like the people that ideally are doing more of the changing. I'm doing my best to be vulnerable so that they can lean in and see, oh, like he's making mistakes too. He's not just like talking down to me, but I'm outlining a problem that women are experiencing. I think they feel validated, but two, they feel like I really, when I decided that I wanted to work with men and help men, that was when I realized that I need to be less deprecating to men, or I need to be deprecating to myself first if I was going to be deprecating to them. And I also needed to do the emotional labor of kind of throwing myself under the bus first so that they could lean in from there. So I think it's a huge part. It's like it's a validation of the struggles that they go through. I think I said I wouldn't talk about politics. I'll say that I think a lot of people look at Donald Trump as, he speaks to a lot of people that feel like immigration, like is a serious issue for them, and so they lean hard into him because he validates an experience that they have. And I think similarly, I think a lot of women that feel invalidated from him, but they feel validated by Kamala. I think they're the the person that validates your concerns and fights your enemies, whether they're imaginary or real. Those are the people that we tend to follow.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And if my husband were here, he'd back me up. But I have for many years now said, like, it feels like an echo chamber where women are writing about this, talking about this to other women,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need more men in this space. Um, and, I have some hypotheses about like why the conversation feels so female typed, right? And I think it speaks to some of what you've just been getting at, that right when you have the sort of frustration, this urgency, this desire for something different, right? You want to get people to solve your problems.
Mm.
And I'm curious about, like, for the men you work with one on one, the 9% of your viewership who are men, like, what do you think gets them in the door? Is it their female
It's their
partner?
wives.
It's their
It's
wives? Okay.
99% their wives.
So their wife sort of comes across you and then is like, hey, husband, like, you should really talk to this guy. Is that how it
Yeah,
goes?
yeah. I think it's usually so. I aim again to be vulnerable first, share where I've screwed up, and then I go to explain like, here's why I screwed up or why this is a misstep. Uh, you know, data says that it takes like 17 touches with somebody for them to like respond. So pretty much every video I'm sharing that I do in fact have services. Um, Usually, what I would love to figure out is of all the shares that I see on an individual video, how many of those are wives sending them to their husband? I would love to know that statistic. I don't know if there's any way to do it, but what I anticipate and what I've tried to train a lot of the women that follow me is give it context. Don't just send the video because I know it can feel very much like an attack and they're going to get defensive. But if you say, hey, remember when I was trying to explain that thing the other day? This is what I was trying to say. He said it the way I think says it better. So do a little bit of emotional labor besides just sending it. And then I think oftentimes they'll see one or more of my videos. I've heard anywhere from I think we should consider getting separated or divorced unless you go to therapy or check out Zach. That's like that's the end of the line that I've seen. I've
Yeah.
also seen, I think more likely is they see enough of my videos. I think the handful of guys get the hint, like I should probably reach out to this guy. But I think a lot of partners are saying, I would really like for you to look and see what his services are. And I think that's the majority of I've probably taken somewhere around 300, 400, 500 calls. No, not 500, three or 400 calls in the past year.
And similar to the question you asked me about, if I talk to you 5 years from now, what do you hope will be different?
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious if you think it's possible, desirable that in 5 years it'll be less sort of woman directed, right?
Hmm.
And like, do you anticipate or hope that it's more men independently taking the initiative, finding you, etc.?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if I do my job right, then I don't have a job, uh, sadly. But at the same time, I'm sure just the evolution of what I would teach and coach to would be different. But yeah, I think there are some guys that I know of the couple guys that have found me on their own. It was typically because their wife would say, "You're putting all the mental load on me," and then they search mental load and then they find me.
Mm,
But I think 5 years from let's start like 6 months from now, as I would imagine to be still the same. Maybe a year from now, I'm hoping that an interesting thing that did happen. Now, I'm sure similarly, like top of business funnel is it's videos. And then I get their email typically, and then I'll email them stuff, and then they might have a free community that I am aiming to do more free teaching, sort of. In September, we did a challenge where I said, all right, $200 on the line for whoever can identify the most mental load of their wife. And I was able to get, I think we had 40-ish participants label. I think came out to like 957 instances of mental load that their
wow.
wives owned. I'm getting the number wrong, but somewhere around there. Maybe it's 857. But
Cool.
that was pretty cool seeing that. And I tried flipping it and saying, okay, guys, like October, now it's your turn to identify the mental load that you do. Because again, I think that when guys can see the mental load in their own workplace, it's easier for them to see the mental load that exists at home. So I think what I would love to see is a hard question. I'm realizing being around the bush here. I think what I would love to see more of, and knowing that I'm doing my job well, is getting more DMs directly from men saying thank you.
Mm,
I get a lot from women saying thank you for helping us shift the conversation. I get a couple from guys, and I
hmm
think it's always for my lifetime. We talk about the pay gap and how we're like 150 something years away from it being equal. I don't think it's realistic given that trajectory and I'm one person for us to shift that far. But I think seeing more guys reach out to me and say, hey, thank you so much for your videos, or thank you for helping me shift the conversation at home. And I think even having guys articulate more accurately of the mental load. Like, God love my cousin. He said, yeah, we use the word mental load at home all the time. And originally I didn't think he was going to be like on board with what I had to talk about because, long story short, I decided to go sober with my wife during her pregnancy. I also wore like a weighted vest, and he was very against that. He's like, I'm not going to stop drinking just because if my wife gets pregnant.
Mm.
But at some point he's like, yeah, like we talk about mental load, and like he was all proud. He's like, Zach, you'd be so proud of me. I said it to my colleague the other day when he was complaining about his wife. He's like, yeah, your wife probably does the mental load. And I guess it was when I heard him use it in sentence a couple weeks ago, the way he used it, I felt was not accurate. It
Mm.
wasn't ideal use of it. So it was like, I think his wife had called him, say, hey, could you, I think it was turn the Roomba off or something, or turn the iRobot. And he's like, that's not on my mental load. And it was like something like that.
Right.
And
A for
so
effort.
what I think he was going for was, that's not my responsibility. I acknowledge that's on your mental load. I don't feel as if that is within my, purview of responsibilities. Um, but what I would love to see more of is both sides being able to acknowledge the mental load that both of them carry. Because I think there's so many moments where I think a lot of women feel swamped and drowning of like, none of this is going to get done or thought of if I don't think about it. And with the level of overwhelm, they can't even see past. I'm sure there's a fair amount of mental load that the men in their lives do own,
Yeah.
and it takes some of their own, like, for if they're the men in their life can acknowledge more of what they're doing, I think they can see past the drowning overwhelm that they're in right now. So I'm hoping there's a little bit more of a split where, you'll see more guy comments, and like my videos will make less sense because they are fairly gendered today. I do my best to use the word partner, but I do also acknowledge, because I know that there's typically, and I think Eva talked about in her book in the documentary, that in same sex couples, like, we're not seeing the same, well, one, you can't have the same gender divides because it's the same gender, but, or typically, but like, they're having much better conversations around it because they have no accidental default to fall into.
Exactly.
So I'm hoping that we're having more of the conversations that same sex couples are having in heteronormative couples.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like one thing, one like top challenge that, let's say, you've got a man who's working with you one on one, like what is the thing that is hardest to shift or change, that the most people struggle with?
The hard part for me to answer about that is that the hardest part is probably already shifted if they're talking to me,
Fair point.
which is like speaking to me in 2020 is like, but if I were to acknowledge what Alyssa was saying and like, hey, can you watch this creator? Like, he explains it really well. In fact, can you check out his courses? I think I'd really like to do something with you, or if you can do it on your own. I would have had to have gotten over the original hump of like, okay, yes, there's an inequality here. I'm willing to see her side of things that I'm willing to acknowledge that I might not understand right now. I think that the biggest hump is for men to be willing to see that even though they are doing what I think culture expects of them, which is bring home a paycheck, make sure your lawn looks good,
Yep.
and be stoic, which is you can be kind of angry, but try not to be too angry, but you're not really allowed to feel any other emotions, maybe joy. I think that's a really shallow picture that culture has offered us. So I think if we can get past that to say, hey, I see that there's an inequality here. I'm willing to see her side of the coin. I think that's the hardest one. I did a survey the other day on a video saying, pull it up. I was asking like, hey, because I got this really nice DM from a therapist saying that she she recommends me like my videos to her clients often. Here it is.
Cool.
So my question was to the women: do you share my videos with him? And the survey, there's 17 responses. My options I gave were yes with context, which is what I coach them to do. Yes with no context. No, I don't share it with him because I don't want him to get defensive. And no, I just learn it here for myself. 41% said yes with context. As you know, as a researcher, given that there's only 17 responses here, we don't have quite
Margins of
enough
error. Yeah.
numbers. But 47% said no, I don't want him to get defensive. So
Mm,
that, I would argue, is the biggest hurdle, is even breaking past the fear that I think a lot of my women following have, which is fear of them getting defensive. I'm
yep.
sure that they're listening to me and looking for where they can insert parts of what I speak to into their everyday language. I'm sure they're doing the emotional labor, but I think one, getting past like, all right, I think I can send this to him. Zach put enough empathy in this video that I think I can share it with my husband. Which every once in a while, I think I should just make videos that are almost reverse, just so it's almost like a Trojan horse of like, yeah, guys, I'm with you, which I am, but like I'm with you in a way that they want to feel heard, which probably a lot of women probably don't love. But I don't know how to dog whistle the women saying, hey, this is the purpose of the video. Just share it with them to get your husband to follow
Door.
me, and
Yeah.
then I'll do my normal stuff. I don't know how to do that. I
Yeah. So
felt
breaking
weird.
past the defensiveness, which I
I think
think
that's it.
has been a theme in our conversation of like, if you want more men involved in these spaces, like, don't overly villainize them.
Yeah. And I think, I think my wife has done a lot of emotional labor over the years of being willing to see my contributions, even if she has done significantly more than I have in the home. I think one thing we're pretty damn good at comparatively to a lot of other couples is we have really tough conversations, and I think we're able to complete the conversations. We can get mad at each other, we can get upset, but I think we're really good at completing them and not leaving them hanging for never to come back to, and building resentment. But yeah, she's done a ton of emotional labor over the years for me to be able to understand these things. And I think also I've had the privilege of having a significant woman audience where my ego is really built up, but at the same time, like when they call me on my shit, like I can take it because I know that they believe in me.
Yeah.
So like when they say I've fucked up, like I can hear that. Like I remember one video was I guess it's coined as a knockout bottle. You put like rice cereal or something in a milk bottle, which makes it a little thicker, but apparently it's a choking hazard.
Oh
I
gosh.
didn't realize that, so we gave it to her one night, and she like fell right asleep. I was like, "Oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever! You just put rice cereal in the milk." And I got 50 comments immediately saying like, "This is a choking hazard. Don't." And I took the video down immediately because I was like,
Don't
I believe in
encourage.
my audience to tell me the right thing. Like that swift feedback was really valuable. So I'm also really grateful for the community that has been built in my comment section over, somewhere over 1,500 videos in the last 2 years, that have really helped me to understand their experience so I can understand Alyssa, so that she can continue to help me grow as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that mutual recognition, on both sides. It sounds like is super important.
Yeah.
Well, this has
Um,
been so much fun. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being game to answer my
yeah.
questions too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, why wouldn't if I get to be interviewed for a top researcher in the world on this subject, is validation that maybe I'm on the front lines of this issue.
Well, you are out there communicating with the people, in a way that I think researchers are a little bit more removed, you get that real time feedback, I think, which is super important. And so I'm glad that
Well,
you,
if you want to interview guys that have worked with me and or that are like plugged in, I have 47 guys in my paid community right now that are actively working on these things, and I still got to do some stats on how much of the video modules they've actually gone through. But I have a handful of guys that I bet if you wanted to do like a qualitative study and interview guys that are a little more on the leaned in side, I
yeah,
got a couple guys that would probably raise their hands.
cool. Okay, I may take you up on that. I've got my hands full at the moment, but I
Yeah.
love that idea because I am super curious about people who are working on it.
Well, Allison, my first thought is if people want more from you, the main place they should go to is your Substack, the Damager Dispatch,
Exactly.
um, and or your website, AllisonDamager.com.
That's correct.
All right. I should be able to put those in the show notes. And oh, realized I never actually subscribed because I realized it wasn't available on the mobile app, but I'm planning on joining the subscription to it. So,
Amazing. I appreciate it.
um, yeah, I'm not much of a blog reader, but I appreciate I know you talked about wanting to put out a little bit more vulnerable content out there. And I know that being the level of intellect that you have, and as you're about to go through having your first child, like it's going to be a lot of juice in those posts.
That's the hope, and I've gotten some inspiration from hearing your story today too. Cool.
Thank you, Allison.